My name is Vashti Alara Crown, and I am 71 years old. I live in a small house at the edge of a town most maps have already forgotten, surrounded by fig trees and the kind of silence that only comes after decades of choosing stillness over noise. I have never been the kind of woman who seeks attention. I raised 4 children, buried 1 husband, and kept a garden that bloomed every spring without being asked twice. I say this not to impress you, but so that when I tell you what happened to me on the morning of the 14th of February, you will understand that I had no reason to invent it. I had no agenda. I had no book to sell. I had, at that precise moment, nothing left to prove to anyone. What I am about to share with you is the most difficult thing I have ever tried to put into words. And I have tried many times, lying awake at 3 in the morning, searching for language that simply does not exist in any tongue I have ever spoken. I will do my best. I ask only that you stay with me until the end, because the part that changed everything is not at the beginning of this story. It is buried in the middle of it, like a stone of impossible weight, wrapped in the softest cloth you have ever touched. It began, as most mornings do, without warning. I had woken early, before the birds, which is unusual even for me. There was a heaviness in my chest that I recognized but chose to dismiss, the way you dismiss the first drops of rain when you have already walked too far from home to turn back. I made tea, chamomile, with a small spoonful of raw honey, the way my grandmother Seraphel used to make it in her kitchen that always smelled of cedar and dried lavender. I sat at the window and watched the fig trees. Then the cup slipped from my fingers, and the world closed. Not dramatically, not with sirens or crashing sounds or any of the violence you might expect. It simply closed, the way a book closes when someone has finished reading, gently, with a kind of finality that feels almost courteous. One moment I was there, watching the gray light come through the glass. The next moment I was not. My daughter Thessaly found me on the kitchen floor 7 minutes later. She had stopped by unannounced, which she almost never does, because something had told her to come. She told me later that she had been washing her own dishes across town when a feeling passed through her. Not a sound, not a voice, but a sensation like a hand pressing against her sternum, urging. She dried her hands, got in the car, and drove. The paramedics worked for 55 seconds before my heart resumed. 55 seconds. I know this because Thessaly counted. She told me she stood in the corner of that kitchen, pressing both her hands against her mouth, counting every second aloud in a whisper, because counting was the only thing that kept her from falling apart completely. I know none of this from memory, of course. I was not in that kitchen when those 55 seconds passed. I was somewhere else entirely. I want to be precise here, because imprecision would be a kind of dishonesty, and what happened to me deserves more than vague descriptions and borrowed poetry. So let me try, again, to find the edges of something that has no edges. The first sensation was not light. Most people, when they speak of these experiences, begin with the light. But for me, the first thing was sound, or rather, the absolute and complete removal of it. Every sound I had ever known, every ambient hum of existence, the low frequency buzz of being alive in a body, all of it vanished at once. And in its place was a silence so total, so architecturally perfect, that it felt less like an absence and more like a presence. as though silence itself were a living thing, and I had just stepped inside its chest. I was not afraid. This is the part I find hardest to explain to people who have never felt it. In the days after I woke in the hospital, many people asked me, "Were you frightened?" And I searched honestly for that fear, turning over my memory of those moments, the way you turn over stones in a garden, looking for something underneath. It was not there. The fear was simply not there. Not suppressed, not overcome, absent, as though fear required a certain kind of body to live in, and I had temporarily been relieved of that body. I became aware that I was moving, though I felt no motion in the way we understand motion. It was more that the world was reorganizing itself around me, the way a fog parts not because you are cutting through it, but because you have become part of it. And then the light came, but not as light comes here. Here, light arrives from a source. Here, light has direction, has origin, cast shadow. What surrounded me then had none of those qualities. It was light that existed in all directions simultaneously, including directions that do not exist in our three-dimensional understanding of space. It came from behind objects and from inside them. It came from me. It came from the spaces between things. It was not bright in the way that hurts. It was bright in the way that completes, the way the last piece of a puzzle completes the picture, and you realize the picture was always there, waiting to be whole. I stood, though standing is not quite the right word, in a field, or what presented itself to me as a field, because I believe now that what I witnessed was my own mind doing its best to translate something genuinely untranslatable into forms I could process without dissolving. The field was extraordinary, not because of its beauty, though it was beautiful. The grasses moved in a wind I could not feel, and they were the color of something between gold and green that does not have a name in English or in any language I know. What made it extraordinary was the sensation it produced, which I can only call recognition, not familiarity in the shallow sense of having been somewhere before. Recognition in the deepest possible sense. The recognition of something you did not know you had forgotten. It felt like coming home to a home you were not aware you had been missing. She came to me near what I can only describe as the edge of that field, where the grasses thinned and something else began. Not darkness, but a quality of depth that made the field seem, by comparison, like the surface of something vast and still. Her name, she showed me rather than told me, was Orianel. I used that word, showed, deliberately, because she did not speak, not with a mouth, not with sound. She communicated in a way that is perhaps the single most impossible thing to convey to someone who has not experienced it. She placed understanding directly into my awareness, the way you place a glass of water on a table. Complete, immediate, without transit. Orianel was not young, and she was not old. She had the quality of something that had simply never been subject to time, the way a mountain has never been subject to fashion. She wore no particular expression and yet conveyed absolute tenderness. She stood close to me, and I understood without being told that she had been present at many moments of my life without my ever knowing it. Not intrusively, not invasively, but the way a current runs beneath a river, invisible from the surface, but responsible for everything. She showed me my life, not as a sequence of events, but as a single object. The way you might hold a piece of sea glass up to the light and see its whole history in one moment. Its origin as a bottle, its breaking, its tumbling in the waves, its smoothing. My entire life arrived in my awareness at once, as a complete thing, and what I felt looking at it was not shame for the dark parts, and not pride for the light parts, but something much quieter and more devastating than either of those. I felt that it had mattered. Every day of it, every unremarkable Tuesday, every argument I had regretted, and every kindness I had forgotten I had given. Every moment I had sat at that kitchen window watching the fig trees and believed I was doing nothing. All of it had mattered in ways I had not been equipped to measure while I was inside it. I wept, though I had no eyes with which to weep. I wept the way the earth weeps when rain finally comes after a long drought, not from sadness, but from the sudden, overwhelming relief of receiving what was always meant for you. And then he was there. I want to be careful with this part because it is the part most likely to be dismissed, and it is the part I am least willing to diminish by describing it poorly. So I will tell you only what is true as precisely as I can. I did not see a face in the way I see faces here. What I became aware of was a presence, and I capitalized that word intentionally because what approached was not a presence in the ordinary sense, the way a person is present in a room. This was presence as a fundamental property of reality itself, the way gravity is a property of mass. It did not arrive from a direction. It did not walk toward me. It was simply, and then it was more. I knew immediately what it was. Not through doctrine, not through the images I had seen in churches, not through any intellectual process at all. I knew it the way your lungs know oxygen, not by reasoning, but by immediate cellular recognition of something they were designed for. The love that came from that presence was not an emotion. I want to be very clear about that. It was a substance. It had texture and temperature and weight. It entered me the way heat enters cold hands, slowly at first, and then completely, until the boundary between where I ended and where it began became meaningless. I did not feel loved the way we feel loved here, conditionally, nervously, always slightly uncertain of its continuity. I felt loved the way a fish is loved by the water it lives in, completely, structurally, as a matter of fundamental design. He did not ask me anything. This surprised me later when I began to process it. I had expected, from everything I had ever read or heard, a reckoning, a review, a weighing. What happened instead was simpler and more radical than any of that. I was simply seen, fully, every corner of me, every hidden room, every locked drawer. Everything I had done and failed to do, and wanted and feared and refused to admit to myself. All of it was visible, and none of it, not one particle of it, produced anything in that presence except more love. Not tolerance, not forgiveness extended grudgingly from a height. Love. The same love as before and after. The same love as if none of the darkness had ever existed at all. I want you to understand what that does to a person. To be seen that completely, that honestly, and to discover that the seeing does not reduce the love by a single degree. It reorganizes you. Something fundamental shifts in the architecture of who you are, and you cannot shift it back, and you would not want to. I stayed in that presence for what felt like centuries and seconds simultaneously. And then, without warning and without harshness, I understood that I was being returned. There were no dramatic announcements, no voice from above declaring that my time had not come. It was more like understanding, after a long visit, that it is time to go home, except that the direction of home and the direction of away had swapped completely, and I was being asked to go toward the place that now felt less familiar. I did not want to go. I will be honest about this, because I think there is something important in the honesty. Standing in that love, in that light, knowing what I now knew about the texture of peace on the other side of this existence, I did not want to return to the weight of a body, to the particular loneliness of being a single consciousness inside a single skull, to the slow confusion of days. I felt the pull of my life below me, the way you feel the pull of the cold when you are warm in bed. Real, unavoidable, but requiring effort. What changed my mind, what moved me, was a thought that arrived with the same immediacy as everything else communicated in that place. It was not a command, it was an offering. And what it offered was this, that I was being sent back, not because I was unworthy of staying, but because I was needed. That the people whose lives touched mine were not finished being touched. That the fig trees in my garden had more mornings to show me. That my daughter Thessaly, who was standing in a kitchen counting seconds under her breath, was a reason. That love, the love I had felt as a substance, was not confined to that place. I had been filled with it. I was being asked to carry it back. So I did. I came back to my body the way winter comes back to spring, with difficulty, with a kind of protest from both directions, and then suddenly, all at once. The first thing I felt was pain, which, after what I had just experienced, was almost funny. The extraordinary indignity of a human ribcage, the weight of air, the specific discomfort of a cold kitchen floor against the side of my face. I heard Thessaly's voice, high and breaking, saying words I could not yet parse. I felt her hands on my face, warm and shaking. I opened my eyes. The kitchen looked the same. Of course it looked the same. The fig trees were still outside the window. The chamomile cup had shattered on the tile and left a small stain. The ordinary world had waited for me with complete patience, the way ordinary worlds do, indifferent to where I had been, incurious about what I had seen, simply present with all its familiar weight and smell and imperfect light. I was in the hospital for 9 days. The cardiologist, Dr. Phelan Marchetti, is a serious woman who does not use words carelessly. On the 3rd day after reviewing my scans and my oxygen levels and the various measurements taken during my 55 seconds of absence, she sat in the chair beside my bed and was quiet for a long moment before she said carefully, "There are aspects of your recovery that I cannot account for with what I have in front of me." I looked at her. She looked at me. She did not ask what I had experienced, but she did not dismiss it either. She said, "Whatever happened to you in those 55 seconds, your body came back different than it left." Her exact words. I wrote them in the small notebook Thessaly brought me on the 2nd day because I knew I would want to remember them precisely. I asked her what she meant by different. She said, "Calmer." It has been 14 months since that morning. The fig trees bloomed again this spring. Thessaly stops by more often now, usually unannounced, and we sit at the window together and do not always speak, which is one of the great luxuries of loving someone for a long time. I think about Orionel often. I think about the field and the grass that moved in a wind I could not feel, and the colors that do not have names here. I think about the presence and the love that had texture, and what it felt like to be seen that completely by something that vast, and to discover that the seeing only ever increased the love. I carry it differently now, this life. Not more easily, the weight of it is the same, but differently, with a different relationship to the weight. The way a person who has seen the sea carries something with them for the rest of their life, that a person who has never seen the sea cannot quite name, though they can sometimes feel it in the quality of the other person's stillness. I am not afraid of death. I want to be clear that this is not bravado or denial. I am not afraid of death, the way you are not afraid to return to a place you have already been and found beautiful. What I am, instead, is grateful. Grateful for this particular Tuesday, for chamomile with raw honey, for the creak of the second floorboard from the top of the stairs, for Thessaly's laugh, which sounds nothing like mine, but somehow, in certain lights, looks exactly like it. For the specific quality of early morning silence before the birds begin. For all of it. All of the ordinary, overlooked, quietly magnificent material of a life, which I now understand is not the waiting room for something more important. It is the thing itself. It was always the thing itself. I do not know why I was given those 55 seconds. I do not know why some people are returned and others are not. And I will not pretend to have an answer to that question, because I do not think the answer exists in the language available to me. What I know is that I came back carrying something I was meant to carry back. Not as a message exactly, but as a quality, a way of being in a room, a kind of stillness that people sometimes notice without knowing why they notice it. If even one part of what I have shared with you today shifts something in the way you are carrying your own life, if it makes the Tuesday you are living right now feel slightly less like a waiting room and slightly more like the destination it actually is, then I have done the only thing I was sent back to do. I was seen completely, and the seeing only ever increased the love. I believe the same is true of you. If this story has stirred something in you that you cannot quite name, I invite you to leave it in the comments below. Your own quiet moment, your own inexplicable certainty, your own experience of something larger pressing gently against the edges of your ordinary day. This space belongs to all of us. And if you would like to be here when the next story arrives, I would be honored to have you. The subscribe button is just below. It costs nothing except a small moment of trust, which, if you have read this far, you have already given, and I do not take that lightly.